a group, which was again the exec postgraduate diploma session, and we had about 60% of the class were from my organization, Thomson Reuters. So in a way, it was the early journey of this particular program was, I think I'd say, we were major sponsors for that program. I genuinely believe it's a great one, and I think the experience and the exposure that this team gets is really valuable. And the kind of people that you meet kind of takes you on your journey professionally quite a long way. Not sure whether we have a presentation. That's fine. I'll probably just use some few notes if you and grew. We survived 2 world wars, no small feat, and the fact that we've survived the ups and downs of financial markets globally, I think it's a very resilient organization. When you think of Deutsche Bank, you think of the investment banking side. But we also have a very strong portfolio of retail banking. The investment banking, especially under Anshu Jain, has been in the news quite a lot. We all feel proud because it's an Indian who's going to lead that side of it. And almost 20 years ago, we didn't really have a strong investment banking segment. Investment banking is an extremely sexy part of banks. Everybody thinks that that's where they make a lot of money. But the part of the bank that we are from is actually the back end. Not very interesting in that sense, but actually we keep the bank, we make sure that the bank survives. What do we actually do? We have a footprint of about 40% of the global investment bank's operations are in India. It gives back about $500 million to the bottom line every year. We have virtually every part of the investment bank's back office here. What is that? Middle office and back office functions. What does that really mean? It's if you have derivatives, trade capture, full life cycle, activities associated with that, including risk and P&L, and the financial closure of books. Those activities happen out there. Number 2 or number 3 in the marketplace. But they didn't really bother about the back end. They didn't want to look at standardization, best in class, especially if you come from IT. You talk about you need to have the right platform, nothing like that. If you look at a Goldman Sachs or a JP Morgan, they started from the center, building out the platforms and taking it out. Whereas these guys looked at, let's build the revenue, let's go get the market share before we land up doing anything else. The negative of something like that is when you try and pull it all together, is you have a hodgepodge of applications, systems, and it's not the most easy way to put it together and track everything. So about 5-6 years ago, we said we need to look at the outsourced offshore landscape for Deutsche Bank. And it was quite a mix of everything. We worked with third parties, we had in-house organizations, we had a mix of joint ventures. So we decided for the back office side of it, we will create our own. And we started on a journey 5 years ago. In India right now we're about 6,500, and in Birmingham, Jacksonville, Manila, and Dublin, together it's another about 3,000-4,000. So roughly about 60% of all the back office functions have been created in the last 5-6 years. What is the implication? The reason the context is important for us is when you build something to scale, you're actually acquiring talent, people from different companies who've done different things. So the philosophy of the guys who put this together was, we need to standardize, we should be like the third-party service providers, as effective as we can be in the way we run our operations. The philosophy of an investment bank is, I need to get trades, and I need to make money. I don't care how the back end looks. So it's philosophically diametric to what the investment bank is all about. So in a way, we recruit people from the third-party organizations with a mindset of driving process. So when you drive process, you look at simplification, you look at standardization, you try to dumb down the process to the extent that you can run it like widgets. And how do you kind of make it as simple as possible so that you can recruit the people with the, let's say, the basic skills and make things happen. But when you reach size and scale, that approach no longer is practical. Because you need to understand your business drivers and what happens. Now, during this period of building up scale, the external world also was not standing still. You have 2008. What did 2008 do for us? The regulators and politicians, everybody started feeling the banks are the bad guys. And I'm going to use a very simple way to describe the entire financial crisis. You guys probably know more than I, but if you look at it, in the US it started off with the subprime issue. If I want to describe it to my grandmother, it would be in terms of people started buying houses, the banks which gave them money decided to use that as collateral to create products and create products and create products. So actually the last product which was there had underlying things which did not have any material at all in them. So when one thing fell, the whole thing fell apart. So if you take that, what's happening today in the Eurozone, instead of it being individual housing thing, it is more to do with countries which have taken more and more loan, and it's left itself at a point where they're not sure whether they can repay it. The mindset, we did a poll in Germany a few months ago. Bankers are rated as 6% of them think they're okay, decent enough people. Doctors, on the other hand, are 96%. People think they're good people. So, from a state of being about 4 years ago, when these guys could do no wrong, we've landed up in a spot and you're dregs of society. You are looking at a point in time when you say if you have to solve the Eurozone problem, the governments are expecting the banks to create a larger capital base so that when they write off the debts of different countries, these banks can take it. But what does that mean? It means the way you operate things changes quite dramatically. The Dodd-Frank rules are still being worked out. So if you look at an investment bank, you have a lot of structured products with which you make money. You have very simple flow products, which is like a cash and trade. We actually do a very substantial amount of cash and trade processing out of India. For example, Deutsche Bank has 21% of the global markets in cash liquidity. So if for some reason we have a problem, the rest of the globe will also have a problem. What does this imply? With the Dodd-Frank Act, a lot of your structured products are going to get more similar to a flow product that's more standard, vanilla. It also means that your profit margins go down quite substantially. What it also does for you is the regulators are all over you. Whether it's BaFin, which is your German regulator, whether it's your Feds, whether it is your FSA, the regulators in Singapore, everyone is after the way the banks run their business. To give you a very simple perspective, some of you may know it, RBI wants 150 reports. It includes end-to-end P&L with an ability to track every asset class and your relationship with every customer in every which way. This is only RBI. Every country is doing it. Take Indonesia, they're asking for it. There's also the question that can you keep your data in your own country? If you're doing this kind of global processing, you're not comfortable. So you have one where global economic or the global financial markets is completely global. You've got a way of doing things which is now, if somebody sneezes in Siberia, it has an impact somewhere else. To a point where the governments are saying, no, I want to take care of my world in my own space. So you have both dimensions getting worked out. So if I look at the work that we do for the US, a couple of weeks ago we ran a disaster recovery simulation. The idea was, okay, Jaipur has gone down because of, let's say, some bus strike. so nobody can be in office. Then suddenly we have a fire in our office in Mumbai, and we need to see where we stand. The reality is, many of our counterparties, like the Goldman Sachs, the JP Morgan, or BlackRock, all of these guys are also here. So it is not just, can you confirm with your counterparty? Can you get things done across the globe? So your global workflows have also changed quite dramatically. So I have this team, which has been built up like a factory, very much like a third-party organization, but the world has changed. And I think the number of people who are onshore who can run this kind of a team have also changed, because they have to deal with the regulatory changes of this kind. So I have two ways to go. One way is become more and more commoditized, drive your STP rates up so that it's more automated. So to give you a very simple idea of how, on the automation side, in the ideal world, input, trade is captured, it should go straight through to output. Doesn't happen like that, because your systems, by the time you build them, are already obsolete. Your regulatory changes keep happening. Your product needs are different. Your customer expectations are different. So naturally, you will always have exception processing. And given that we came from verticals which built their revenues in their own space, we got a lot of breaks between one system and the next system and the next system. So that's your exception processing. So there are teams or asset classes where our STP rates are 97%. There are teams where your STP rates are as low as, I don't know, maybe 60%. So which means 40% is manually processed. And you have the workflow starting with a transaction in, let's say, Asia, goes to a hub, say Singapore, comes to India, gets something done, goes to JAX for something else, goes to some other place, and then gets closed out. It's quite an insane workflow that happens around the globe. Not necessarily the most efficient ways to do it. So you try to say, okay, let's improve the trade capture side, put all the various activities that are happening, and since the bulk of you are from the IT, you put the different modules together, maybe have a wrapper around it of some kind, so that your manual intervention comes down. One of the things with the banks, how many of you have worked with the bank? Yeah, the regulatory aspect of it is insane.
It is.
It's absolutely insane.
Especially in the US, what happened in the
Yes,
US?
absolutely. I mean, it is almost to the point of joining from a media company into a bank. I thought I'd go insane. You don't have access to basic stuff which you take for granted. So it is, a lot of our rules are for the regulatory reasons. Just to give you one factoid, in China, in the financial services space, on a daily basis, 4 new changes happen. So that has to be kind of factored in. And if you look at every market, for every asset class, you have something new always happening. And the operational loss is what you track. And some of the penalties are really, really serious. So this is where we are. So do we get more, as a team in India, get more standardized, simplified? Or do we move up, or become far more front-to-back aligned? How do you go? What's your thought on that? Do you think we should go further front to back, or do you think we should get more simplified and standardized?
Can you reflect a bit on that, going more front or back option?
Okay. Front to back is the front office gets into a trade. You then say some middle office activities that happen. That could be in terms of looking at credit risk, looking at how the transaction confirmation is there, whether some of the documentation aspect is there, and then you actually complete the trade in full life cycle. That is, it goes through document checking, it goes through confirmations, it goes through reconciliation, risk and P&L, and then finally into your book of accounts. So it's a very, I'm using very simplistic
it's a little bit of chicken egg here. I mean, you don't want to lose your business, because your customers, I mean, if you are waiting to build your systems to standardize it,
Yeah.
probably it can take years.
Yes.
In the meantime, I mean, your customer which are in New York, London, they will be at your back, and
Yeah.
you're losing billions of dollars business.
Yeah.
So try to find out some temporary solutions,
Yes.
and over a period of time you standardize those.
Absolutely.
And And again, there is not any wrong or right answer in terms of do you do standardization or you do front and back.
Yeah.
So I think it all depends on priorities and what is the values at stake if you don't do that.
Yes. No, I think you're absolutely right. Any other perspectives on that?
Yeah, I think what Pankaj says is quite valid, but one more thing which you can look at is that, what out of these lot of processing that you're doing could be tuned through IT in such a way that the maximum value can be extracted. Right? There are a lot of changes that would happen, there are a lot of regulations which will come, and you will have temporary patches, right?
Yes.
And you will standardize things, but there are certain opportunities that these things throw.
Yeah.
Right? And then you can see that, can I create a system, IT system, which would implement some solutions which will enhance my STP, and hence, I will be able to get long-term more value.
Yes. Absolutely.
I just want to expand the question a little bit.
Okay.
So, what Sandhya was saying was, on one side you have this commodity business, right? You become more and more efficient and you go down that track. On the other side, can you go up the value chain in terms of the work you're doing today? Obviously, as a back office, you're doing a lot of work, but can you specialize more? Can you start supporting your different asset classes in more complex work? Can you go up that value chain and align yourself very closely with your front offices? So we are at a point where we are in the middle, and you have to kind of make a determination on, do we focus our energies and go become the best factory out there, or do we focus our energy and align very closely with our different front office needs, our client needs, or is it even feasible to go and be both? Obviously there's a big question on that was Sandhya's question.
To your point, even that we need to again, it is not about worship, it's happening across a lot of other businesses as well.
Absolutely.
We definitely need to move up the value chain, either it's a lot of stuff Wipro, TCS or other companies are doing, or you are doing as in the back office. So, but how we do it, there are a lot of example people where I've done it, and I'm very sure with the talent we have, it shouldn't be a huge problem for us to move forward.
I totally agree. You have
No longer holds true. So you have no option but to move up the value chain and see and align yourself to the changing environment, because you have to be relevant in the changing times. If you get stuck to the only doing the back-end function, then maybe after a point of time that relevance will fade away. So to maintain your relevance in the changing times, you have no option but to move up the value chain, and that's what, as Pankaj also said, a lot of other companies also doing the same.
okay.
There are two things. Obviously, the low-lying fruit is that you move onto a move up the value chain. But the thing is, you move to a new, say you expand your value delivery. But what is new today will become a commodity tomorrow.
Exactly.
So the company needs to get into this practice of making things operationally efficient. So even though we deliver new products, we need to have this expertise of making those efficient. I think it's not an option, it's mandatory thing which every company coming forward, going forward will have to do.
Absolutely.
Of scope. So right now you are standing at a point where you are either increase your scope or you increase the scale. What I understand from working in a bank is like the logical flow from a back office to a front office is that most of the parts that a back office does, there is some overlap with the mid office also.
Yeah.
Because when you're completing a transaction, you're getting it executed, you're taking care of the risk also. So some kind of overlap is there, but if the efficiencies are there, probably the value going up the value chain, you can remove those inefficiencies, and the kind of what cost arbitrage we're talking about. Tomorrow another country might come and they might provide a better cost arbitrage than what India was providing now. So looking at the future also, the kind of strategic importance that this unit should have should be well and clearly defined in the value chain. So I
Okay.
think moving up the value chain makes more sense.
Okay, let me share what I'm sharing, and you guys are also on the same page as we go along. We've finished setting up this office, or we call it the SOM program. This was done by August of last year. August of this year. So we have got the cost arbitrage out, the standardization, simplified approach. As an organization, the business alignment goal is far more aggressively needed today. For example, the feds asked for, tell us what your top 10 projects are. So we need to make sure that every part of our organization is aligned to what the top 10 projects are, not have one set for one part of the organization and the other. And typically of very large organizations, that can very easily happen. So the business alignment is one. The second aspect for us is front to back. And when we say front to back, when you look at, and I'll kind of actually go into the Thomson Reuters experience, we merged the two companies. When you merge two companies, you had Reuters was very strongly in the financial market data world, apart from the news. By the way, 3% of revenue came from news, the rest of it was financial market data. So it's a very, but we all know the Reuters world from the news side. The Thomson part of it was, Thomson Financial was the smallest of the lot. So when it merged into the Reuters side of it, because it was, this is 1/3 the size of Reuters. One of the things that we found, and there we were doing product development on the Thomson side, so including looking at one of the projects that we were working on last year was, if you looked at the Indian marketplace, we looked at rapidly developing markets, and we said, who's a high net worth individual? Super wealthy, mass affluent, which would be most of the people in this room by global classification.
No.
No, really, because if you look at the joint income of the, of spouses, that's where they put them as mass affluent. And that's the kind of services that we're looking at. So how can you use mobile services to provide the investment information that you want? And if you build it for India, you can then take that particular process or that product to other parts of the world. Because when you have a rapidly developing economy, that's the kind of thing that you look at. So if you are looking at the value chain, and that was very easy, because that's not something that the US guys can ever produce. They won't think like the way we do, because this is a market that has a completely different mindset about the way the behaviors are. And if you're looking at the customer segmentation and look at that and go in deep, the kind of investment interest that your friends and family take and the advice they provide you is very different from what would happen in the US or in Europe. So we realized that if you want to really crack this market, you have to look at it very differently. And it's a very interesting one. So when you go up the value chain, you can look at, do you want to go into a value chain which your primary organization is not doing, and therefore you have that interesting space to play with. Part of the reason why we got actively involved in we were part of the back office was looking at the RBI reports and seeing what these 150 reports are about, and it is part of the front office revenue earning part of the organization. If you look at it from the front to back perspective, you need to start looking at what is happening in the marketplace, and therefore what's your response around it. So for example, in our equity space, when US got degraded in August, we used to have transaction volumes of about 2.5 million per day in that market. Overnight, it shot to 8 million. Your systems were not built for 8 million. Your capacity was about 3.5 million. How do you know which ones to switch on and switch off? And believe me, if you have a backlog in that transaction, you could have a net negative position in your financial, you're making money payments right through based on every transaction. And if you make if you have a wrong position there, the regulatory impact could be, the penalization around that is huge, and your reputational loss is immense. So when you talk about a front to back understanding and taking ownership, the head of global operations actually sits out of Bangalore and reports into me. So we do have that level of fairly deep ownership on what we do. But what's really scary is when you build this kind of global footprint, who sits where and how do you make decisions around telling off which dial and not, is something that unless you understand the workflow really well, you could drop the ball. So when you say front to back, what we realize is, yes, we have capabilities, but they're scattered in different places. So if I want to take a decision, I need to be kind of structured so that I can leverage off these capabilities right across the globe, not say I need them all based out of India. How do I leverage the person in Jacksonville and Dublin and maybe someone in Hong Kong to get that done? And it's a tough one. And we actually had to report back to the feds on how we managed it without having a loss. it's a tough one because if you make a loss during that time when you have backlog, you really can be put on the dock in this most serious way. You know how they get bashed up in the newspapers. You can't afford that. That's the newspaper test. So you need to understand the larger market context, what the regulatory pressures are around that, and what's your organizational response to each of it in each country. That is one part of it. The second part of it is what's the risk associated with it. If you have a product, there's a product risk. There's a market risk. Rapidly developing markets have a type of risk, whereas I think the mature market has a different kind of risk. You then look at it in terms of your customer credit risk, your counterparty risks. So therefore you're looking at the whole thing in terms of risk. But then you also look at, if it's India, what are the processes that I'm doing? And if I'm down for a month, what will be the revenue impact around it? Because these are real-time systems in a way. If I've got 21% of the market in terms of liquidity for cash, it basically means you go to an ATM, you'll not get cash anyway. That's what it boils down to. You cannot afford to have it go down. That's the real-time stuff. It sounds very interesting, but bottom line is it's actually a bunch of people who are trawling through Interpol, CBI, FBI, whatever kinds of regulators are out there, and looking at the list and making sure the payment is not going to Obama or his friends and family. And usually they do that. Believe me, it is, their market team does look at some of those things. Osama. What did I say? Oh yes, slip of the tongue. Can you edit it please? I really don't want this for posterity. That was really slip of the tongue. But I think in a way, the importance of the critical processes that we do is very, very severe. It can cause systemic risk in mature markets because you have such a large footprint of the banks in India. It doesn't matter whether it's our bank or whether it's Goldman Sachs or Fidelity or anybody else. Any large service provider here today has the impact globally, and we don't realize how serious it is. Some do, some don't. The other aspect is technology. How stable is it? How scalable is it? Does it have the capacity to handle it? We expect in the next 3 to 5 years, the volume of trades to go through to be very, very high. For what I said earlier, you're going to be going for more simplified, standardized products, so which means more volumes, unlike the more structured products. So which means your trade volumes are going to increase quite rapidly. And with the volatility, you can't predict it. You can't use your past data to do any of the predictions. The process flows are complex. The STP rate is one thing, but how many handoffs do you have between different teams? And that causes a lot of breaks. How much of those handshakes require equal interface? That's another set of factors. Then you look at it in terms of maturity. Most of you are familiar with the CMM models. But think of the CMM model in terms of an asset class. Commodities, it's still evolving as an asset class, as a whole thing. And I didn't know this, but if I get into a commodities trade and you have gas, and the delivery of gas, I assumed I went in for 10 trillion whatever of gas, and when the person takes it from you, the delivery, they check the amount. The actual physical checking happens. And when you think of the leakage of gas, it's not something that you think about. So when you're looking at commodity markets and the way it gets managed, the complexity around that and writing off the losses and things like that is very, very complex. And I don't know enough about that space, but when I heard that, I was thinking, God, I really don't know how somebody's going to measure it and track it and really get the numbers in real time. So it's not just that can you do it or not, it's the real time and the speed of action which is more important. So it could be an asset class maturity, it could be a rapidly developing market which may not be very mature, or it could be your organization structure. So US or UK is very mature, but India is still evolving. So the handshake between those two groups can be very complex. What's your service delivery model? Does everything flow to me as the head of the institution and I'm held responsible? Or does every team report in separately and do their own thing? The highly verticalized model? Both needs to be there. How do you manage that? What's your customer survey say? When we started 5-6 years ago, we were 14 out of the whole list. Today we are number 1 and number 2 in terms of customer service. And we've recently won some awards around that. I think globally we keep winning awards, but this is really important to us because it implies that your service has kind of gone up. You look at it in terms of cost per trade, which again is with a comparative basket. Where do you stand? What are you good at? You're very good at certain aspects of it, not so good at certain other aspects of it. How can you remain competitive around that? So you have to look at all of these dimensions and then say, how do I segment my business, which is there? This is this team, it's in this stage of maturity. The maturity of the product is like this, the risk aspect is like this. How do I look at managing that? So what's my competing priorities at a global level, at a local level? And what does success mean at different points in time? So the segmentation of this information and having a heat map to look at something like that is almost very critical. So it helps you to manage. It also links up with the people side of it. You look at your org structure and then say, okay, which are my roles which are highly critical? And when you say critical, it could be critical for the next 2 years. You can't look at anything beyond that. So in the next 2 years, you're migrating something and therefore you will be absolutely critical until that thing is completed. But once it's completed, that particular role, not the individual, that particular role is no longer as critical because it's done. Maybe there's another role that becomes more critical. So we have to actually be looking at that. The other aspect you can look at is the people and roles. You obviously look at the talent. You say, what's your potential? What's your performance? What's your aspiration and engagement around it? Those are all the usual things that you do. But it may be that in your particular team, for whatever reason, you've learned, you're very competent with X, Y, Z initiatives. There's nobody else who's got the combination of those 3 initiatives, but you've got them. So in my case, I can have an analyst who's a fairly junior person, so the transaction is, from a role perspective, a very commoditized role. But because the person understands, let's say, 6 markets, what that does for us is that that person becomes very valuable and definitely a flight risk. So unless I'm able to build in my succession plan for all the 6 markets, it becomes quite complex. So the segmentation of talent, and then you start looking at how do I attract and retain the talent. Because attraction and retaining talent in this context is fairly complex because let's assume you guys are all roughly average 8-10 years of work experience. What will attract you versus somebody who's got 4 years of work experience, somebody with 20 years of work experience, completely different. Salary is basic, and you make sure that it makes sense for you for the role that you play. Once that's out of the way, what else holds you there? And what you find is the more senior you are, you want networking competencies, opportunities. Do you get interesting roles that intellectually satisfies you, helps you move up the ladder, whatever it is. So you have different needs, and how well are you matching that with the organizational aspirations, and how do you do it in the most cost-effective way. So keeping that context in mind, I think there's a lot that we're doing around that. But there is one thing, as you move from a more, let's say, horizontal, which is your service delivery model, to a more front-to-back model, which means you are one of the global team. What makes you successful today in your current role, that leadership quality may not be adequate in the global environment. Some of the people will succeed very well. Just think of the usual bell curve, that's what will be there. You'll have some people who will be extraordinarily successful there. You'll have some people who will really fall, even though they may have been extremely capable in what they do, but they don't really succeed in the global environment. There will be others who need a certain amount of effort around that to make them succeed. What are the skills, the soft skills? And I'll step back a little bit. A couple of months ago, we had a global anthropologist anthropologist, or I think she's an urban anthropologist. She works with a hospital in Washington. If you guys want to check what urban anthropology is about, you can read it up. There isn't much, there aren't enough studies around it, but it's an interesting one. Basically, I think her premise was in the last couple of 100 years, human civilization has evolved very rapidly. So whether you say industrialization, globalization, digitization, whatever it is, and that's what I was referring to, you have somebody, we all come from different backgrounds. But I think in the workplace, we are very global with the kind of organizations that we work for. We are used to certain styles of working which is extremely international. But yet, when it comes to, you've got a seat at the table because you're doing something really significant. But how many people really listen to you? It's not, I'm not talking about the ideas. You have the ideas, but do they listen to you? And there are certain filters that come in there. Because you don't have the 20 years of banking experience to back you, to provide you with that halo effect. For people say, yeah, he comes with 20 years custody experience, so I will listen to what he's saying. You don't bring that to the table. So what is the filter? So keeping that in mind, I think you have both hard and soft elements. One is, what do you bring to the table that is unique, different, and therefore they want to listen to you? So your perspectives around that, actually, and you've got to figure out what is it that will be valuable to the larger organization, which will have impact, not just in the short term, but it's a little more long term. So what will make that group more successful, and what is it that you can contribute? That's one. Second is, how do you behave so that people listen to you? And what are the behaviors that will get you the voice at the table, or rather make you heard at the table? Because it's easy enough to get you to the table because of the size, scale, and the kind of activities that we're involved in. And that soft skill is something that I think India definitely is struggling with. We've got very smart people, very capable people, but when we're at the table, we want appreciation of our global boss, quite often at the cost of the local person. You don't listen to the local. People forget that matrix is multidimensional. If you don't behave well with your peer group and your peer bosses, you can be killed in that place. Because somebody else will say, don't listen to him. And in a bank, the franchise building is absolutely critical for your success. So it's both the soft and the hard skills. The other element around that is, do we truly understand? In India, things are growing. I mean, yes, we can talk about one quarter we haven't had enough growth and everything else. But the reality is the trajectory over the next couple of years is going to be growth. Maybe it may not be as fast. Maybe it may not be as much as we'd like and we want it. But there is growth. We are in an environment where we know we can make things happen. There's opportunity for us. You have your counterpart who's in an environment who's not sure whether the son will have a job, a good paying job, and they don't know what kind of advice to give him. My previous boss, his son has just gone to Cambridge. And he said he was in a very depressed mode because he didn't know what to take up to study. He said, I would have asked him to get into either computers, media, banking. I don't know what to advise him because I don't know whether he'll have a job in any of those fields. And if he does, I don't know whether it'll be a good job. So the reality of that, what the lady said, the urban anthropologist, that everything is terrible, it seems, is true. Today, in India, you can see people with completely different backgrounds making a success, and it's brilliant. And it doesn't matter what kind, whether it's an art, whether it's technology, whether it's entrepreneurship, the regular business world, you have that happening. That is what we used to see when we spoke about the US. Today, there is a lot of questions that get asked. It's still there, but it is that, when I mentioned to you, that is something that if you are going to engage with your counterpart who's worried about his son getting a job, and you're talking, oh wow, we can do this, you're engaging in two different mindsets, and that how do you sell the idea? So it's not so much only your soft skills of being able to talk at the table there, but it's your sensitivity in able to sell that idea for the good of the organization so that everyone aligned around the common purpose and takes it forward. So the front to back, and I'm talking about it from a captive offshore center, because that's the advantage, because you can really align to the single goal of the organization of that kind. That's your opportunity. So actually individuals get more opportunity when you go front to back. You have more career paths which will take you to the global workload. The negative is this one. If you don't know how to learn that skill, I think it's true for even the third parties because they're still engaging with the same mindsets. But I think these are kind of some of the drivers which are out there. So keeping that in mind, I think we are at this cusp of change as an organization. We've got how do we drive STP rates up? So that's part of my global remit, which I think Rohan and I have been kind of grappling with and drawing up. How do we draw a front to back opportunity landscape, which is great fun. It's also frustrating because the organization is not structured like that. You've got to find an artificial way to do it. We're also looking at it in terms of how do you get the people aligned and ready for the kind of change it is. You've had people who built this organization. They have the cultural history. They have an immense desire to make a success of it. How do you make sure that they don't fall on the wayside because of the changing dynamics with which we are dealing with? I'm talking about it from an India perspective, not a global perspective. So that is some of the kind of challenges that a lot of us are facing. I worked on a paper last year for Thomson Reuters on knowledge centers in many of the offshore locations. The opportunity for growth is there. And when I talk about growth, it is if you're looking at research and scientific healthcare, the volumes are really large. The kind of projects and programs which are out there, it's huge. If you're looking at legal and all the other different spaces, it's there. But when you've already had a large center set up, the cost arbitrage which you spoke about, that's done. You got it done in the first year. After that, that's your baseline. The organization, that's not the value that you can kind of be playing with. It has to get linked to the revenue opportunities. It's your operating margins and what can you make an impact on the operating margins that you look at. So those are our kind of opportunities and challenges. I think in some ways it's a good place for us to be. So questions, comments, thoughts?
For interactions that you have had with the third parties that you mentioned, have you ever had a kind of feeling that, oh, okay, something is missing here and this could have been done better with the third parties, or is there something like a gap that you see as of now? And do you think that over the coming years it needs to be filled up?
I think third parties, it's not this or that. There are things that, if I have to run, this is my personal view. None of these opinions are their organizational opinions. I need to make sure to set that right up front. But I think if I take something like technology, and I have the technology team rolling up to me, I honestly find it difficult because if I were a technologist, I'd like to play around with all the technologies. As a third party, you can do that a lot more. Whereas in a bank, I'm constrained. So in some ways, it's a lot easier to work with a third party because you can play around and give me the best practices from there. Having said that, there are certain things that a third party will not be able to take ownership of. The regulatory pressures, it's mine. Even if I give it to you, what's the worst? You say, oops, sorry. We may have a liability clause in there. The reality is I'm the one who will end up facing prison. So as an organization, the legal aspect of it or the regulatory aspect of it will be that's something that will remain in-house, whereas there are certain aspects where it is much more easier to partner with third parties. We'll do both. And that's why you find banks have actually been able to do both.
This ambitious journey of moving back front, as you call it, or let's say moving up on the value chain, I think this is one journey which a lot of knowledge centers either have taken or they are like
In the
aspiring to take, right?
Yeah.
Because that's eventually where you are actually not leveraging cost arbitrage, but you are leveraging intelligence arbitrage, which is much better and much beneficial. However, one thing which is really, really important to achieve this is the senior management commitment, not just local, but of the global leadership.
Yeah.
In case of Deutsche Bank, how does that fare out?
I think it's very much, we looked at offshoring as one. The global footprint, I wouldn't even call it offshoring. The global footprint was one part of the journey. The second part of the journey is the back office needs to be aligned front to back, of which, the global footprint also aligns that way. So when you look at it as an organizational alignment, it becomes a lot easier because is the back office aligned to the business? Are we really understanding how our customers make money? And therefore, it doesn't matter whether it's in India or Jacksonville or doesn't matter which or London, are we aligned effectively? So I think we are lucky. If I take my Thomson Reuters example, I had a few senior board members who were willing to play that game. So there were pockets of the organization where we did that. There were other pockets where we were just doing the usual role items. So I've seen in organizations when we did the study, depending on the organization, you have some pockets which are willing to experiment, some pockets which are not. And that's fine, and that's why the segmented approach is very important. Maybe for, let's say, commodities, they may not want to experiment because the asset class itself is a bit, it's evolving. But on the other hand, because it's evolving, they may want to experiment. So depending on the need of that particular group, they may choose to do it very differently. And I think if you're smart, you will make sure that you have your champions in the system to make it happen. Yeah?
For the coming years because of regulations and stuff. But when I think through it, if every country is coming with their own regulations and their own standards and forcing banks to implement it, if you want any sort of sophisticated products, won't the products be tailored specific to the country and not become standard at all?
You're right, it's free macroeconomics. Every regulator is talking to everybody. In fact, they're talking to each other faster than I think the banks are talking among themselves. Maybe. I mean, I'm joking, but the reality is the regulators are talking. And in fact, you have Fed, FSA, and BaFin. When they talk to many of us, they talk together. So there's a lot of convergence in the regulatory space. What does the regulator really want? They want to make sure that they understand the financial products. And if I quote from this book, you have some of the best brains going into investment banking. Best B schools, best capability, and you pay the best salaries. Whereas the regulators have not had that until recently. In the past few years, it's changed. We've had more people with lots of experience going there. So yes, countries will create its own regulation that causes its own complexity. You will also have a certain amount of standardization because of the global nature of the financial markets itself. So FX, for example, Forex, it's money movement all over the globe. So you've got to have certain common standards around it. And it's been brought up earlier than what we expected to roll out. And it's a tough one. Comments?
So you said, in terms of the challenge you have related to the soft skills, how you deal with someone in US, someone over here in UK, and somewhere else. So one of the thing I found, I was working in Capital One. They have set up a center in India. What they did was they brought in the talent from different countries back to India, and that kind of gave them a little bit of front end because those people had a culture context as well as kind of a little bit of familiarity, and they used that kind of building up the team. I don't know how. If you
We
tried
have
that.
that. For example, John, who heads the global security settlement business, John Ford is a British man. We have a fair number of expats working on our operations. We have a large number of Indians working internationally. We have a lot of people. There is a lot of that, but it's still not enough.
Yeah.
I was talking about it from size and scale. So I think there are very interesting cultural models. One of them is Richard Louis' communication or something like that. and it talks about the linear American style culture to the more Latin cultures to the Asian cultures. There are very specific competencies and skills with which we can kind of address it, but it's still, it's still a lot, it takes time.
It's functional.
Yeah.
I just want to rethink, but I just want to caution in the sense, the bread and butter of the business we are in is the cost arbitrage, and every other country is doing it better than we do, or we are competing aggressively. So at the end of the day, while going up the value chain is one solution, it is not the solution, because we can't obviously let go of what we have earned so far. So it is this, the decision about how do we be more efficient and compete in that space, at the same time go on the other side as well. And that was to Sandhya's point on which parts of our business, if you look at your business in a segmented way, which part of our business goes up there, which part we focus going down here, and which part we take both and go diagonally up. So that is the thing.
Segmented approach as much as possible, and how much can technology actually play a role? I think that's one of the most interesting things. Well, I think thank you very much. If you guys are interested in getting involved in any projects, feel free to reach out. I think it's one of the things that we've actually done a lot with London Business School. And we have actually many of those guys working with us on a project basis. And the reason I say that is insights and the advantage that both parties gain is immense. And therefore, feel free to reach us anytime.
I want to thank Ms. Sandhya for simplifying probably what is one of the most complex global problems that we have today, and for this interactive session. Thank you very much. I also want to thank Dr. Vasudevan and also Mr. Rohin to take time out of their schedules to come and spend an hour with us. As a small token of remembrance, I want to